Hey guys! In today's video you will learn the true story of Reuven Halevi, an Orthodox rabbi from the USA who died during Yom Kippur and returned with a shocking revelation. He saw Jesus, and now claims he is the Messiah. Get ready for a chilling story that will challenge everything you thought about faith and truth. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment below which city you are watching. I want to know how far this message will reach. My name is Reuven Halevi. I'm 48 years old and a rabbi in Chicago, Illinois. The son of Israeli immigrants, I grew up in a home where the Torah was the center of everything. Since I was little, I was trained to keep the commandments, study the prophets, refute Christianity with logic and honor. Never, not even in my most extreme daydreams, did I imagine that my name would one day be linked to Jesus. It was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The synagogue was full, the men in kippahs, the women separated, everything as required by halacha. I conducted the service seriously. With each prayer, my heart broke for the community, for the people of Israel, for the sins that distance us from the eternal. But something that day was different. In the middle of Kol Nidre, I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't anxiety, nor hunger from fasting. It was as if time had stopped. I tried to ignore it, to carry on, but the pain spread like an electric current. The faces before me turned into figures, the Torah fell from my hands, and then blackout. I thought it was fainting, but there was no darkness, not even light, just awareness and silence. Until the light has arrived. She didn't shine, it existed. There was no source, no shadow, it was alive, it palpitated. He breathed. He knew me. And then I heard my name. Reuven. But no one spoke. It was as if the universe itself was calling me. The light began to shape itself into human form. It was no ordinary apparition. He wasn't an angel. It was not an energy. It was someone. Someone I denied my entire life. He was in front of me. Jesus. The impact was devastating. There was no debate, no logic, no theology. There was presence. My soul knew. Before the mind understood, the heart had already recognized. It's him. The same person I called a messianic charlatan, an error in Christian interpretation, now looked at me with eyes full of compassion. I fell. I cried. I tried to deny, run away, argue, but he just said, "You've been looking for me your whole life. You just didn't know it was for me." That light, that voice, that truth. It destroyed everything I believed in, and at the same time it rebuilt something new. And all I could say was, "It was the Lord, all along." I floated in the midst of that living light, breathing a peace that didn't seem of this world. There was no weight, no time, no gravity, just overwhelming love. A love that I saw everything I was, and yet I didn't back down. Jesus did not need to say his name. The soul recognized before the mind. It was as if every cell of my being screamed in unison. It's him. And it broke me. I spent my life studying the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the Psalms. He read Isaiah 53 and said it was about the Jewish people, not about a man. He read Psalm 22 and said it was poetry, not prophecy. Now, there, in front of him, everything made sense like never before. He looked at me with a look that I will never forget. It wasn't an accusation. It was regretful. Like someone waiting a long time for someone who promised to arrive, but always stopped before the door. My mind was still trying to resist. It can't be. It contradicts everything I've studied. But he responded, without moving your lips. It doesn't contradict, it complies. And then the vision began. I saw myself in my youth, with my head covered, reciting the Shema Yisrael with my father, in our old synagogue. I remembered my ordination as a rabbi, my mother's pride, the smiles of the community. All of this was real, sacred, but incomplete. Jesus said, "You love the truth. That's why I came." That sentence went through me like a sword. I felt naked but not ashamed, just revealed. It was then that he extended his hand, not physically, but with something that surpassed matter. Suddenly, I found myself in a room that wasn't a room, in a time that wasn't time, an eternal space where the scriptures lit up like flames. Verses I had studied 1,000 times now connected like perfect gears. Genesis 22, the ram in place of Isaac. Exodus 12, the blood on the doors. Numbers 21, the serpent raised in the desert. Psalm 22, pierced hands and feet. Isaiah 53, the suffering servant crushed by our iniquities. Zechariah 12, they will look at me whom they pierced. Every letter, every line that I defended as truth, now screamed the name that I never accepted, Jesus. My legs gave out again, or what's left of them. Fall to your knees in that living light, not out of fear, but why my heart had been pierced by the truth. Everything I create, it wasn't a lie, but it was just half light. And there, before him, I saw the sun rise. Jesus approached and said, with tenderness and authority at the same time, the Torah was a map. I am destiny. I cried, not out of shame, but from breaks. And in that instant I knew I was no longer the same. It would never be again. After the revelation, there was no time for arguments, no court, no judgment, only an invitation. The presence of Jesus was so intense, so dense that I felt like I just had to dissolve there and everything would make sense. But he led me forward. Come, Reuben. There were no steps, no movement, just transition, as if we were passing through the invisible fabric of a greater reality. And then I saw. I don't know how to describe what I called heaven, because it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen on earth. It wasn't a place made up of streets or mansions. It was a living conscience, an environment of glory, a melody made from eternity. Leaf, everything was love, but not this love that we talk about out loud. It was absolute love. No barriers, no masks, a love that I knew and embraced at the same time. There were others there. They were people, yes, but not with bodies like ours. They were like conscious lights, vibrant, free, weightless, no guilt, no past. They looked at each other with a joy that made me cry, not out of envy, but for hope. And the strangest thing? I felt at home. Even though I was someone who denied Jesus my entire life, I was accepted in that place. Not as a stranger, but as a son who finally found his way back. Jesus walked with me, or rather existed at my side, with a divine calm. I didn't ask, but he answered. They didn't get here on merit. They came because they accepted what was given for free. My legs gave out once again. For free? Everything I taught as a rabbi was based on effort, discipline, obedience. I thought that if I followed every commandment, I would please God. That redemption would come when Israel was pure enough. And now? Now I saw a rescued people not by effort, but by grace. They accepted the Lamb. Those words exploded inside me like silent thunder. Jesus was the Lamb. The same as the shadows of the Jewish festivals. The same as the night in Egypt. Same as Isaiah 53. And then I saw something even deeper. In the center of that glorious place was He, Jesus. Not just a man, not just the Messiah, but the very incarnate glory. His eyes shone with a light that didn't hurt, but healed. His voice was melody and sword at the same time. His face was the portrait of eternity with human features. And then he said to me, "You sought God with all your strength. Now you will see fullness." At that moment, everything around me vibrated. as if the sky itself reacted to those words, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. As the sky pulsed with indescribable joy, something inside me began to feel heavy, not out of doubt, but for a called. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I hadn't seen everything yet. Jesus looked at me. He knew. With a gentle nod, no words, he took me further. The light softened. The vibrant air gave way to a denser silence. The heat disappeared, like embers going out. I felt like we were descending, not towards space, but towards absence. And I soon realized we were going to the other side, the side of separation. That's when the darkness began. But it wasn't lights-out darkness. It was a living shadow, suffocating, that seemed to cling to the soul. An emptiness that wasn't just the absence of God. It was the refusal of Him. And when my eyes adjusted to that darkness, I saw them. Human figures, or what they once were. Curved, empty, trapped within themselves. Some walked in circles, others just screamed, without sound. But the scariest, it was the look. There was no physical pain as we imagine. There was overwhelming regret. They knew. They knew what they rejected. They knew the name they refused. And now they lived in an eternal echo of what could have been. I was shaking. I wanted to look away. I wish I didn't see it anymore. But Jesus kept me steady with His presence. They are loved, He said, but love doesn't force, it invites. And in that instant, I understood something I had never understood. Hell is not God punishing. It's the soul hiding, even after seeing the light. I saw a woman stretching her hands towards a distant glow as if she was still waiting. Still, she was crying, but there were no tears. Just absence. I saw men screaming without a voice, trying to go back, but trapped in the pride that still prevented them from saying, "Forgive me." They didn't accept it there, and they won't accept it here, Jesus said with such deep sadness that it broke my heart. But I still love them. I cried not out of fear of being there, but knowing that if I had died without this revelation, perhaps I would have been among them. And then, in a whisper of eternity, I heard, "That's why I came, not to condemn, but to save." The darkness began to recede. The light came back, slowly like dawn after a night that was too long, and when she wrapped me around again, I felt broken, but whole. I understood. Jesus was not a traitor to the covenant. He was the hand stretched out in the middle of the darkness. And at that moment, a new fire began to burn within me. I needed to tell. I needed to go back. When the light enveloped me again, it was no longer the same as the one that greeted me at the beginning. Now it was more intense, closer, more personal, as if I had been shaped by my story, my calling, what was yet to come. Jesus stood before me, radiant but not distant, majestic yet accessible. It was as if He carried the sky itself in His gaze and at the same time knew me better than I ever knew myself. I knelt down again, but this time not by shock, not out of shame. I knelt because my heart knew that was the right place, the only place where everything made sense. He approached. "You have sincerely sought the truth," He said, even when she seemed tough. My tears started to fall. I wanted to explain, justify my beliefs, my rigidity, my fidelity to the Torah. But before any words came out, He spoke again. "Your loyalty was not in vain." That dismantled me. It wasn't a reprimand. It was validation. And then, with a short pause that seemed to pass through time, He said, "But now, you will be a bridge." My soul shook. I understood the weight of those words. It wasn't a title. It was a mission, being a bridge between what I experienced and what I saw, between Torah and fulfillment, between Israel and the Messiah. Others like you will come. They will seek. They will ask. and when they hear from you, they will believe. But why me? I asked silently. Because your heart is sincere, and whoever trusts you will listen when you speak. These words, they crushed me and lifted me at the same time. I who denied Jesus for decades, that I taught that the Messiah was yet to come, that I debated, argued, studied. Now he was called by him, not as an enemy, but as an ally. I cried, not out of sadness, but out of a kind of surrender I had never experienced. A sweet surrender, a liberating submission. You will be hated by some, he continued, called a traitor, a madman, a heretic. I didn't say anything. He knew I was scared, but it will also be sought after by many, by those like you who love God, but don't yet see the full plan. There, between eternity and the world, between light and calling, I said yes. An unreserved yes, a yes from the soul. And when I said it, something lit up inside me, as if his own spirit touched my insides. Mission given, transformed identity, sealed path. I didn't know how, where, or when, but I knew it was coming back, and that nothing at all, would ever be the same as before. After my yes, there were no more formal instructions, no list, no manual, just a silence full of purpose. Jesus looked at me with that same devastating love, the kind of love that sees everything, including what we hide from ourselves, and yet, hug. It's time, he said. Those words echoed like a distant drum, and the sky around me began to dissolve, not in darkness, but in too much light, as if being pulled back by invisible threads, layer by layer. Peace was moving away. The perfect sound was muted. The full love was there, and I was coming back. I felt like I was falling, but not down, falling into the flesh. The contrast was brutal. Glory turned to pain. The heat turned to cold. Lightness became weight. Suddenly, everything was machine alarm rush. I opened my eyes, dazzled by fluorescent lights, screams, needles, hands pressing my chest. He's back. Sure, Rabbi. It was the hospital, Chicago, the old world, the broken body. The pain in my chest ripped through me. The head seemed to spin without stopping. But what hurt most? It was his absence. My wife Deborah was there, pale with red eyes, holding my hand with a strength that seemed to pray with the touch. When I looked at her, I didn't need to say anything. She knew. Something had changed. I cried, not because of the physical pain, but why I was here and not there. I was hospitalized for days. The doctors treated me like a miracle, a massive heart attack in the middle of a religious celebration. No history, no warning. And yet, I went back, but I knew I didn't come back by chance. I went back with a mission. The first nights were torment. I woke up sweating, my head was spinning with everything I had seen. How to count, who would believe? How would a rabbi with over 20 years of study, teaching, and fidelity to the Torah say, I saw Jesus? I tried to keep quiet, but the fire inside me wouldn't allow it. I picked up my phone at the hospital and looked for a Bible app, one that had the New Testament. Trembling, I opened it to João. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Each word passed through me like an electric current. I no longer read with the eyes of a skeptic. I saw it. I felt. I remembered the light of presence from the mission. There, lying there, connected to life support in a cold sweat, I found peace reading about him. And I knew. I can't hide it. I can't remain silent, even if it cost me everything. Coming home from the hospital was like enter a museum of my old life. Every detail of my home told the story of Rabbi Reuven Halevi. The books of Halasha lined up on the bookshelf, the Talmud commentaries stacked next to the couch, the menorah inherited from my grandfather, the mezuzah on the door, the aroma of challah bread still in the air. Everything was in place. Less EU. It was like walking among the ruins of who I had been. My wife, Deborah, looked at me as if trying to read a book in another language. My children, Sarah, Eli, and Noam, watched me silently. They felt they understood. They knew that something immense had changed. That night I ate dinner in silence. The food tasted like sand. The weight of what I needed to say crushed me. So, unable to sleep, I got up, went to the living room, and looked at the Sefer Torah open, on the shelf. What now, Reuven? I asked myself. I knew what was at stake: my reputation, my community, my entire identity. If I spoke, I would lose everything, but if I remained silent, I would lose my soul. The next morning I called Deborah and the children. I sat with them in the room as we did so many times to study or pray, but this time there was no text. There was an earthquake. They looked at each other. The tension in the air was almost visible. I need to tell you something. My voice was shaking, and then I told him all. From the moment I fell in the synagogue until the living light, the presence, the words of Jesus, the sky, hell, the mission, the truth that was shown to me. When I spoke the name Jesus, the world seemed to stop. The name echoed in that room as if it had never been said there before. My daughter, Sarah, covered her mouth with her hands. Eli squinted, trying to understand if I was joking. Noam looked at his mother. Deborah was silent, teary eyes. "Did you see him?" she asked, her voice breaking. I saw. "And you believe that he is the Messiah?" I just shook my head. "I know it is." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. No charges, no screams, just heavy breathing. It was Noam who broke the silence. "What now? Are you still Jewish?" That question hit me like an arrow. I took a deep breath, and I responded with the last of my strength, more than ever, because now I know the one the Torah pointed to all along. Nobody left the room, nobody hugged me, but no one left. They listened, and that, for me, it was a miracle. Saturday arrived. Shabbat, holy day, rest day, but inside me, what was there was war. The external world remained the same. The braided bread on the table, the ancient songs, the faithful gathering at the synagogue in Chicago, like on so many other Saturdays. But in me, the peace I knew had been replaced by something else. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. I knew what I needed to do. Count. To speak. Reveal. But how? How do I tell my community, men and women who have trusted me for decades, that their rabbi now believes in Jesus? I walked to the synagogue as if walking to the scaffold. Every face that greeted me, every Shabbat Shalom, sounded like a whisper of farewell. I felt God's eyes on me, not with pressure, but with expectation. I went up to get out, the pulpit where I read the Torah so many times, where I challenged Christians with solid arguments, where I taught that the truth was there, and only there. "Before we begin," my voice echoed, "I need to tell you something that happened to me." The murmur began softly, but no one left. They trusted me, and that hurt more. A few days ago, during Yom Kippur, I died. Sighs. Hands over mouths. Someone dropped a siddur. I told him then. The light, the presence, the separation, Jesus, the mission. I used each word with reverence. No theatricality, no preaching, just the raw, brilliant truth that pierced my heart. And then I dropped the bomb that I knew would divide that room. I know, Jesus is the Messiah. He does not contradict the Torah, he fulfills it. He is what we expected and did not see. An absurd silence fell over everyone. Some looked at the ground. Others stood up. A lady began to cry softly. One of the most influential men in the community, Isaac Mendel, a longtime debater with whom I spent hours discussing Midrash, stared at me with tears streaming down. "Did you see him?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I saw it. I didn't hear about it. I saw it." "And do you still believe in the Torah?" "More than ever, because now I see where she was pointing." And then something happened that I never expected. Isaac started to cry, not out of anger, not out of revolt, of breaks, of recognition, of hope. Others, of course, left. Some called me a heretic, but several stayed, not because they believe, but why something inside them also began to tremble. That day, I didn't convert anyone, but I sowed the sky, and what seemed like the end to me before, it was just the beginning. After that Shabbat, my life turned into a storm. I was cut off from rabbinical advice. Colleagues with whom I shared studies stopped answering my calls. I received anonymous emails calling me a traitor, a heretic, a madman. Some members of the community stopped looking me in the eye. Others began to avoid me as if I carried a disease. But do you know what hurt more? The doubt in the eyes of those who loved me. My wife Deborah remained at my side, but in silence. Their looks were not of rejection. They were from people who still didn't know if I had gone crazy or finally woken up. My children walked in circles. The oldest, Eli, kept quiet for weeks. Sarah, the one in the middle, asked questions that were too deep for her 17 years old. And Noam, he just watched me, as if expecting something. And I understood. Why even I was trying to understand. I spent days and nights reading, turning over the Bible. I started with the New Testament with trepidation, as if I were entering forbidden territory. But soon, I found myself at home. Every word of Jesus broke me and rebuilt me. The Sermon on the Mount, the parables, the tears over Jerusalem, the blood on the cross. It was as if, finally, the Torah had gained a voice. Shape, blood, meat, love. And then, I went further. Volte, au Tanakh. But now, with new eyes. And what I saw took my breath away. Genesis 22, the ram replacing Isaac. Exodus 12, the blood of the lamb saving homes. Leviticus, sacrifices that pointed to something, someone greater. Psalm 22, pierced hands and feet. Isaiah 53, crushed by our iniquities. Zechariah, they will look at me, the one they pierced. They were all talking about him. They always have been. The scriptures I defended with sword, now they pass through me like arrows of love. And then Deborah found me one night, silently crying with the New Testament open in my lap. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. I looked up, and for the first time I saw no doubt in hers. I saw search. "No," to answer, "because I have not left the eternal. I have found him completely." She sat next to me. I didn't say anything. He just placed his hand over mine. We stayed there for minutes, which seemed like forever. And then she murmured, "If it's true, then we need to meet him too." I cried. Again. Not out of sadness, but because the bridge was starting to extend inside my own home. Life after that never returned to normal, and honestly, I never wanted the old normal again. I began to share my experience not as a preacher, but as a living testimony. At first, just in small groups, interreligious meetings, private dialogues with more open rabbis. Many rejected me right away. Some laughed. Others looked at me with pity. But every now and then, a pair of eyes opened. Some saw in me a mirror of what they also felt in silence. Jews who always suspected there was something more, but were afraid to think about Jesus. As if it were a betrayal, as if loving him would stop being Jewish. And that's where I say most. Jesus didn't take me away from my faith. He completed it. I still light Shabbat candles with Deborah. I still fast on Yom Kippur. I still study the Talmud. But now every page of the Torah shines differently. Every feast points to Him. Every sacrifice and makes sense. The map finally led to the destination. My prayers stopped being monologues and became conversations with the one who called me by name in the world between worlds. My kids still ask tough questions and I don't shy away. I don't give easy answers. I give you the only thing that really transforms, the truth that set me free. Today I speak in synagogues, sometimes as a guest, sometimes as a survivor. I speak in churches where Gentile brothers welcome me with tears. I speak online, I write, I share, not to convince, but to show that there is a way, that there are Jews who saw it, who believed, that they met, and never looked back. Sometimes I receive messages from other rabbis, some hostile, others secret, full of questions, fear, and thirst. To those I say what I heard there. You sought God. Now see the fullness. Deborah reads the New Testament with me today, still silent, but no longer conflicted. Sometimes she cries, sometimes she smiles, and when we pray together it's as if the light I saw there is beginning to dawn here. If you've heard me this far, I only ask for one thing. Do not harden your heart. Don't be afraid to seek the truth, even if it costs everything you thought you knew. Because when you find the truth, you don't lose your faith. You meet your Messiah. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.